Okay, everybody, welcome to the One Thing webinar. This month, we're going to be talking about mastering your habits with author extraordinaire and now podcaster extraordinaire, Gretchen Rubin. So happy you could make it. We've got over 300 people, and it's just climbing. I'm watching the number go up and up. We had close to 2,000 people pre-register, super excited about this message and about this guest. On the screen, you can see my social media handle. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Gretchen Rubin, you can find her on Twitter as well. And if we missed your question, we'll be sending out links both through your comments bar from Ian and marketing and also the ones on your screen, trying to remind you where you can find us if you really do want to follow up. Let's get this thing started. So today, obviously, we're going to talk about the one thing for mastering your habits. Gretchen Rubin is the author fairly recently of an extraordinary book called Better Than Before, Mastering the Habits of Our Everyday Lives. She's also the author of The Happiness Project, of which I'm a big fan too. But when I saw that she was coming out with this book, we reached out, and it's perfect alignment with our One Thing tribe. A lot of you are working on your habits, and Gretchen has really introduced some new language for me, and I've read it all, on why it's particular to us, how we acquire habits. And I'm really, really excited about going in depth on that with you. But so just a quick outline of today. I'm going to quickly remind folks of what the one thing's about. What we found in our polls, which you'll get at the end of this webinar, we'll ask you to take a real quick survey, and we hope you will, that roughly 7 out of 10 people who show up for these webinars have not read the one thing. And I often will talk about some of the things in there, so I'm going to give you the down and dirty 3.5-minute explanation of the one thing to set the tone, and then hopefully you'll see all the connections with that book and why we're also invited Gretchen to be our guest this week. So the big idea is Pareto's principle, the 80-20. We believe it's a law of success that's as real as the law of gravity. Gary's definitely made this the anchor of how he makes decisions in his lives. He's going to do the things that get him the greatest impact. So what Pareto's law basically says is that the minority of what you do will get you the majority of the results that you want. It also works the other way. Bad habits can also get you the majority of the other stuff. But when you understand this, you understand that you're looking for the things that are going to be the most positively impactful in your life. A lot of Gretchen's journey, if you've read her books, is looking for those levers to help make us happier people, to have more joy in this life. So I think that's definitely a place where we line up. What we believe is when you narrow your focus down to those essential few, really that essential one, is that you can get a domino run in your life. When we were looking at domino runs as the metaphor, right? Because our book's called The One Thing, and everybody says, well, there is more. It's never just one thing, Jay. It's more than one thing. Well, we believe that you can line them up such that by doing one thing, a lot of other things can happen. We found out, like for instance, that the world record for actual physical dominoes is almost 4.5 million dominoes set. That world record was set in the Netherlands. There's also a fact, a guy named Lauren Whitehead in 1981 wrote an essay about how a 2-inch domino can knock over a 3-inch domino, and a 3-inch domino can knock over a 4.5-inch domino. He basically proved that just the laws of physics, that a domino can knock over one that's 50% larger than the next, and he built them out of wood. And he described it that what began with a gentle tick, a 2-inch domino, 8 ones later ended with a large slam. By the 8th or 9th domino, it was larger than a door frame. We asked the question in our book, like, if you could keep building them, how much momentum could you build? How much more can that one domino achieve if you really stick to it and let it grow strong over time? And it's kind of astounding. If you could physically build them, that 2-inch domino, by the time it got to the 18th and it was growing at that rate, would knock over a domino larger than the Tower of Pisa. By the 23rd, it would be larger than the Eiffel Tower. And it kind of boggles the mind, but 31 dominoes into that run, the domino it would knock over would be 3,000 feet above Everest. And by the 57th, it would almost stretch from the Earth to the moon. And so that's called a geometric progression. And if you've been on these One Thing webinars or heard any of our training, you know, that shape, they call it the hockey stick. And anything that grows at a consistent pace, it compounds over time, is going to create a graph that looks like that. And we believe that's the shape of success. Success is how you personally define it. It's what you want. But when you do one thing and you master it over time, your results will start to compound. And we've seen it again and again, and we did almost 5 years of research looking at companies and people, and that's the shape that we saw. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can grow a lot faster than you think it would, and it can get a lot more powerful than most people would believe. So we want people to identify their first domino, to align them so that they can achieve this in their lives. And most often it's going to be in the form of a habit, right? What's your one thing is almost always a daily activity. An athlete, it might be training. A musician, it might be practice. If you're a coder, maybe it's coding. We know that if you're in sales, it's lead generation. And so we asked the question in our book, how long does it take to form a habit? And I love that one of the rare books, Gretchen Rubin, had made mention of the same research. There was a group out of Australia that found on average that habits form around 66 days. Basically, any activity that you're working to form, right, an active habit in your life should get about as easy as it's going to get after 66 days. That number is an average. And as Gary often points out when he's training, averages are good for average, right? I don't really care what the average temperature in America is. I want to know what it is in Austin, Texas today, just like you. Your average is going to depend on you, how you form habits, and we're going to learn a lot about that today, and also what kind of habit you're trying to form. Some are easier or harder than others. But the big takeaway for us was it's a lot longer than most people believe. Most people will tell you it takes 21 days to form a habit, and that's just not right. You're looking for the place where the effort goes away. So with that set up, I want to introduce you to Gretchen Rubin. And she has spent, and I'll have to ask her, I don't know how many years she's spent researching habits, but she's got a depth of understanding about it. It's absolutely clear in her writing. So Gretchen is the author of several books, including the blockbuster New York Times bestseller, Better Than Before, The Happiness Project, and Happier at Home. She has an enormous readership both in print and online, and her books have sold more than 2 million copies worldwide in more than 30 languages. I can tell you, as someone who's been in publishing for 20 years, those are huge numbers. On her weekly podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, she discusses good habits and happiness with her sister, Elizabeth Kraft. And if you've read the book Better Than Before, you know that Elizabeth is a recurring figure in there, as Gretchen will role model not just conceptually how habits work, but how it works in real life for different people. Rubin started her career in law and was clerking for Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when she realized she wanted to be a writer. She lives in New York City with her husband and 2 daughters. So Gretchen, if you'll unmute yourself, welcome to the One Thing webinar.
Oh, I'm very happy to be talking to you today.
I am super thrilled to introduce you to our audience. And I raised that question about research in there. How long did you spend preparing to write this book? How long did it take you?
Well, working solely on a couple of years, but really a lot of the research that I had done about happiness, which I've been working on for many years before, really directly fed into habits. It took me a while to kind of slice out the actual subject of habits. I'd been dancing around it and seeing it threaded through everything. So I'd actually been thinking and reading the research about it and stuff for a long time before I really identified it as my central subject.
Well, it was clear, and I commend you, that you weren't just surface browsing magazine articles.
Yeah.
Really were diving in and getting to the nitty-gritty. So let's just, I guess, start at the very, very fundamentals. How do you define a habit? What does it mean when you say habits, right? Better than before. What does a habit mean to you?
Well, you know, it's interesting because a lot of times when people talk about habits, they focus on things like frequency or repetition or the familiarity of cues around a habit. But I've really come to think that the key element of a habit is decision making, or really the lack of decision making. And something is a habit when it's a behavior that's on autopilot. You know, I don't decide to get up at 5:30. I don't decide to skip dessert. I don't decide to do strength training at 10 o'clock a.m. on Fridays because that's my habit. I already decided. I don't have to keep making decisions. And that's why they're freeing and energizing, because making decisions, using self-control, it's draining. It's hard to do that. When something's a habit, then you don't have to use any mental bandwidth on it. And it's funny, say that I'm writing about habits, or people often say to me, like, well, you know, I really want to go through my day making healthy choices. And I'm like, no, you don't, because every choice is a chance to make the wrong choice. You want to choose once, Make it a habit and stop choosing.
I love that definition, and I underlined it. I wrote down in my notes that habits are advanced decision making, right? You're just checking it off and never having to do it again. And we talked about willpower, and I think you were referring to it as self-control. And there's all this written about, how Steve Jobs wore the same clothes every day, right? So he didn't reduce his cognitive stamina. But I think people underestimate how much energy it takes to make the same decisions day in and day out.
Oh,
Um,
100%. And you can spend the whole day debating, should I go to the gym? Yeah, I should go to the gym, but I don't want to go to the gym. Do I have an excuse not to go to the gym? Maybe I'm too busy to go to the gym. Maybe it's too cold to go to the gym. And you can spend the whole day agonizing about it, exhaust yourself, never go to the gym, and have completely worn yourself out just with that internal debate. Or you can just get up and go, never think about it, and by the time, and then it's over. So it's very freeing not to be constantly weighing those decisions.
If only decision making actually burned calories, like it could be the decision making
Oh,
workout or diet, right?
yeah, right. Oh my gosh, yes.
Well, one of the stats you threw out, and I'm not going to put you on the spot like I just did, but I was kind of stunned that you had found that on average, like 40% of our daily behavior is just repeated habits.
Yeah, that's what the research suggests. So habits are like the invisible architecture of everyday life. They make up the scaffolding of everything that we do. And so if we have habits that work for us, we're just much more likely to be happier, healthier, and more productive. And if they don't work for us, that's going to be a much bigger chore.
Well, that's the reason. That's why we need to master our habits because, I mean, almost 50% of our life is being conducted by them.
Yeah,
More for
yeah.
some people, less for others. But I mean, that's a huge percentage of my life that I would like to have some input on, at least on the front end,
Yeah.
so that it's not just happening and I'm seeing my life go by me. So when I
Well, and
wrote
also,
that, I wrote that's what's at stake here. It's 4 out of 10 days of our life, or 4/10 of our life.
they shape our existence and they also shape our future. Because if you think about the way your life is going to be 10 years from now, in many ways it's shaped by the way that your habits are going to be between now and then. When you look at the top causes of death in the United States, many of them are directly attributable to behavior that's within our conscious control. When you look at people who are successfully pursuing projects that are important to them, making changes that are important to them, a lot of times it has to, have they successfully implemented a habit or not? So they make a really big difference over the course of our lives.
Well, I agree. So with that, with no further ado, you went on this journey. You identified, that this was a huge thing that people needed to address, and you mix in a lot of research with a lot of real world, like, and this is what it actually looks like when you're trying to do it in an apartment in New York or in a house in
Yeah,
LA, which
yeah.
I know that in our audience, they really love to see the role plays, right? That this is what it actually looks like. A lot of people learn that way. So big thumbs up on that. What do you think is the most important step for mastering habits? Where do you begin?
The most important thing to realize is that you have to figure out what is true about yourself so that you can set up a habit in a way that's going to work for you. And a lot of experts argue for kind of magic one-size-fits-all solutions. Oh, do it first thing in the morning. Start small. Do it for 30 days. Give yourself a cheat day once a week. And all those strategies can work for some people sometimes, but they don't work for everybody all the time. And I think a lot of times when I talk to people who are discouraged because they've struggled with a habit that they've had trouble changing, a lot of times they've set it up in a way that wasn't right for them, where they just sort of ignored themselves as part of the equation. For instance, there really are morning people and night people. Like, that is a real thing. And night people are at their most productive and creative later in the day. The morning is not their strongest time, whereas I'm a morning person. I'm best in the morning. So I have a friend who's an absolute night person. I mean, I've known him for years. He's always been a night person. He can barely get himself to work, in the morning, and often is late. And he looked me in the eye and said, my New Year's resolution this year is to get up early and go running before work. And I thought, no, it's not. I mean, you're not setting yourself up for success. Like, that might be true for someone else. It might sound good on paper. It's not what's going to work for you. So the first thing you have to do is say, well, what kind of person am I? Another way this comes up is abstainers and moderators. When facing a strong temptation, some people do better when they have none. They kind of are all or nothing. They can have none or they can have it all, but they're not going to have a little bit. That's like me. I'm an abstainer. I've like
I'm with you
never had.
too. You describe
Are you?
people that can have one square of chocolate a
Oh,
day, and
oh,
I'll go and I'll like hoard like all the Halloween candy my kids forget, and I'll have all the peanut butter candy there, and I'll go and I'll just say I'll just have one. And 5 minutes later, there's like a wasteland of wrappers at my feet. Like I just can't. So it's either all or
yeah,
nothing. So I'm with you on
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and moderators are the people who can have one square of fine chocolate, who like keep a container of ice cream in the freezer and have like 3 spoonfuls whenever they feel like it. Those are moderators. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. They're just different approaches for facing strong temptation. Same thing with technology. You know, my sister, you mentioned my sister, she had to give up Candy Crush because she said it was actually interfering with her career. You know, she couldn't play a little bit, you know, but for some people they can do a little bit. And so you have to know which is true for you. And the problem is that a lot of times, you know, abstainers and moderators come into conflict. So you're in an office and somebody walks in with a giant box of candy and the other person says, oh my gosh, why did you bring that in? You know, I'm going to eat the whole thing today. And the person says, oh, well, you just need to learn how to manage yourself better. Why should we deny ourselves just because you have no self-control? Blah, blah, blah. And it's not that one person's right and one person's wrong. It's just that we're different and we have a different way of handling our habits. And the more we know is true about ourselves, the more we can set up habits that work for us, and also the more forbearance we have for other people. Because we can say, it's not that you're right and I'm wrong, or that you're wrong and I'm right. It's just that we have different approaches. So we need to figure out how to set things up so we can both thrive.
One of the things that was going through my head when I was looking back at your whole book, you have these, there's the good and bad of our identity, how we label ourselves. And a lot of people might label themselves a night person because that's just the habit that they're in. Whereas I know that there is a percentage of people that are actually owls.
Yeah.
How do we know, like, how do we actually know ourselves? Because that is something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I was an owl until I had children, and my children made me into a lark. And that's just a fact. Like I always wonder, like who gets to be an owl after they have kids? But I guess there's some people that they're going to be a night person regardless. How do we know the difference when it's our self-talk and maybe we're fooling ourselves versus no, this is who I am?
Well, you know, that's an excellent question, and I think no one can know except for you. And sometimes you have to experiment. You have to see. But this is you've mentioned a terrible problem for night people, and studies suggest that night people are less happy than morning people, and the supposition is that the world is set up for morning people,
Yeah.
and so night people are just sort of constantly at a disadvantage because everything is set up for the day to start too early for them. And I know night people who really have struggled. And this is sometimes like I'm a morning person, my husband's a night person, and in a way sometimes it's good because if we got a new puppy, somebody has to get up at 5:30 in the morning to have the new puppy. I can do that, but then I got to go to bed early. My husband's up late, you know, and so in a way you sometimes that can you could trade off with like with somebody, or if you have to cover an account. A morning person could cover the early and a night person could cover late. So there's advantages and disadvantages to that. Now, but you're exactly right. And many people who say they have trouble sleeping or they complain that they're exhausted all the time really just don't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
Most people need at least 7 hours of sleep. And it's very tempting to stay up late because for a lot of people, they use that last hour or so as their leisure time. They really feel like, well, no one can make any claims on me. My kids are asleep. My office has finally stopped emailing me. Now is when I get to just like goof off and have fun. I don't want to miss it. I don't want to go to sleep now and miss out on the fun. But I think, you know, the thing to do is really to say to yourself, is that really how I want to spend that hour? Do I really want to spend the hour from midnight to 1 a.m. watching like reruns of reality TV in a semi-coma because I'm so exhausted? Or do I want to decide, oh, you know what, I'm going to start watching TV when I'm at the gym on the treadmill. I get to watch my TV, I'll work out, and I'll go to sleep earlier. You know, when we're very conscious of the and we're grown-ups, you could make that trade-off. But I think we want to be very conscious of the trade-offs that we're making because that's when we can shape the life to be the way we want. But if you sort of say to yourself, well, I'm exhausted all the time, but then you can't consistently get 5 hours of sleep, well, you've got to recognize that you're the one who's choosing to do things that way. And it's not likely to change. Like, if you don't get more sleep, you probably are going to be exhausted.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to really know that about yourself.
Well, that I remember that section in the book, and it rang true for me because I know there was a period of time where between work, family, getting the children to bed, the only time I actually had the home to myself was like at
Hmm.
9:30 at night, and I knew that like I've got like 30 minutes left before I'm gonna suffer if I don't watch it. So when will I ever watch a movie? And I had that dialogue, and you have to get, if you want to have a regular alone time, you have to get kind of creative about it or move it around. Since we're talking about this morning stuff, I just wanted to highlight, and we're going to do a blog about it, and I want to credit you for it. I tend to coach people to move things to the morning if they can do it. And because you tend to have more control and there's less interference. Otherwise, you have to wait till it's so late. And then there's a lot of entertaining things on TV where there's not that on 5 a.m. in the morning. But you suggested in your book for people when daylight savings ends, which is coming up in just like 3 or 4 weeks, if you were wanting to kind of move your clock up a little bit, just instead of sleeping in for an hour, just keep getting up at the same biological time and you've just bought yourself an hour of morning time. I thought that was brilliant and I've never heard that before.
Oh, good. Yes. Yeah. It's a way to take advantage of the change in the clock so that you don't have to actually change your body, but you get the benefit of the change of the day. Yeah. No, it works really well if you're trying to buy yourself that hour.
Well, and that's your friend that wants to start running before work. Like, yeah, you may have to wait 364 days for that to come around, but that would be the
Yeah.
opportunity where they're not actually sacrificing more sleep to do it.
Right.
I thought that was fairly brilliant and just totally common sense. I'm just going to hit timeout 1 second. I'm going to remind everybody that there's a comments toolbar. If you logged in before the webinar, we went through a couple of practice runs. If you've got a question, and I'm seeing some showing up, if you've got a question for Gretchen at the end of this talk with about 15 minutes left in the hour, we're going to go to your questions. So please type them in. And when we see, especially if we see a pattern of multiple people asking the same things, we're going to absolutely attack those first. So Gretchen, kind of back to um, getting back to knowing ourselves better, which is kind of where we were in this whole talk. You've got this framework in your book, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. The Four Tendencies. Um, Gary and I, when we wrote the one thing, we just kind of had in our mind the largest body of people. So we were playing the percentages. We were giving them one piece of advice. But you created a framework where if you identify with one of these four groups, you might approach forming habits differently. Can you tell us kind of how that came about and what the four tendencies are?
Yeah. Yeah, everything in the book, I came up with 21 strategies. I identified the 21 strategies to have a change. The Four Tendencies was definitely, probably my whole life, the most intellectually challenging thing that I've ever grappled with. And what I set out to do was to understand the differences among people's habit natures. Because when you read the research about habits, there's an unspoken assumption that we all have the same aptitude for changing our habits, and that we all have the same attitude toward habits. And that seemed to me just obviously not true. It seemed obvious to me that some people found it easier to change habits than others, and in some conditions more than others, and that some people really were philosophically opposed to habits, whereas I love habits. And so I wanted to make sense of all of these differences I saw among people and really put them in a spectrum, like how do you compare and contrast people? And what I realized after a lot of arduous thinking was that people fall into four categories, what I call the four tendencies: upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. And this really has to do with how you deal with the idea of an expectation. And a habit is a kind of expectation. So we all deal with outer expectations, which are things like a work deadline or a request from a spouse. And then there are inner expectations, which is like your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution or your own desire to get back into running. So the first category, upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations alike. So they keep a New Year's resolution, they keep a work deadline without much fuss. They want to know what's expected of them, and they want to meet those expectations, but their expectations for themselves are just as important as the expectations of other people. Next are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. So they'll do something if they think it makes sense. They don't want to do anything inefficient or irrational. They'll say like, well, why am I listening to you anyway? Why are you telling me what to do? And so in a way, they make everything an inner expectation because they can do it easily if they endorse it. But if they don't accept it, then they just won't do it. Then are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I got the insight into this tendency when a friend said to me, you know, the weird thing is I want to run, and when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice, but I can't go running now. Why? And I thought, well, why? It's the same person, the same behavior. Then it was effortless. Now she can't do it. What's the difference? And the difference is when she had a team and a coach waiting for her, that outer accountability, she had no trouble doing it. But when it was just her own inner expectation for herself, she struggled. And then finally, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to do the opposite. They want to do what they want to do in their own way. They want to act from choice and freedom. And of all these, rebel is the smallest tendency. Very, very few people are rebels. The largest tendency is obliger, but also questioner. Upholder is also a very, very small category. Most people are questioners or obligers.
Really? Okay. I was wondering how they, do you know like how they break down from the people? Like on the screen there, we have your model and we have a link for people to take a quiz after the
Yes.
webinar. Hopefully they won't multitask during it and figure out what the four tendencies are theirs. But so is it like 10% of the population is a rebel and 10% are upholders? Do you know what the percentages are?
You know, I'm loath to put exact percentages on it because I often wonder if, you know, if people are exactly right, because sometimes when I talk to people, I'm like, you say you're an upholder, but actually you're an obliger. You know what I mean? But over and over and over, yeah, I would say a rebel is smaller than 10%. I think it's much smaller. It's very rare. It's conspicuous. You know a rebel, and they know themselves. It's funny because when I came up with this, I thought rebels would being labeled because they would want to be themselves, and they 100%. They're like, that is 100% accurate for me. And it's funny when I speak at conferences where people know each other, often as I'm describing one of the four tendencies, people will start to point to people in the audience. Like everybody around them instantly knows what they are. So I think a lot of people know what they are just from a brief definition, even before they take the quiz, because they're like, oh yeah, man, I'm constantly meeting other people's expectations and not following through on my own stuff, or questioners are like, oh yeah, everybody's always asking me, why are you always questioning everything? My boss is saying, stop questioning my judgment, you know. But so I think, but obliger is definitely the largest. I think that's the biggest, and they are the obligers are the rock of the world, and they're type O. It's appropriate that they're obligers because they're the ones that are sort of most universally compatible with the other tendencies.
Oh, that's cool. Typo. I like that. The
Yeah.
when you were like going through that, I immediately, when I was reading the book, I identified people in my life that were each of them. And
Oh,
my
you
wife,
did? Excellent.
yeah, and I was like, I'm a questioner with an upholder tendencies, and my wife is a questioner with rebel tendencies. And we
Mm.
absolutely understand how we kind of walk through life that way. And where we meet in the middle is we both ask questions about why we should be doing things. But I knew people, all of them, and what was funny is you described the obliger, that there are times where the obliger will absolutely dig their heels in and flip-flop. And I've
Yeah.
actually seen that. We actually experienced that with someone very close to us where they had been taking care of others for so long that they just absolutely flipped to the opposite extreme.
Oh, how did that show up? What did they do? That's in the book. I call that obliger rebellion, which is when they meet expectations consistently, and then all of a sudden they kind of snap and sort of like, now I will do no more. And it can be a very destructive pattern. What can I ask? How
I
did
don't
it
want to
show
give the
up?
details away because I have a feeling
Okay.
this person might
Okay.
be listening, but I saw it as a
Okay. Okay.
very positive outcome. It was
Oh,
more like,
good.
you know what? I'm going to take control of the situation.
Oh, good.
And I know that's not what you expected, but this is what's got to happen going forward.
Well,
And
that's great.
yeah, and but it had the stylings of a rebel, but it was a very positive transformation, and it was a very good thing overall.
Well,
Um,
that's great. That's great because often obligor rebellion can be very destructive, and it can be a problem in relationships, and it can also be a problem at work because obligers often feel like other people are taking advantage of them, and in fact, the other three tendencies do tend to take advantage of obligers, and they build up sort of this resentment and this burnout. and then sometimes they snap, and it's a big problem. So it's great to hear that you saw a positive consequence of obliger rebellion, where the person was really getting free, because a lot of times what happens is they can kind of blow up a relationship or blow up a situation or do something that's very that can have negative repercussions. One way that obligers, I often, like, it'll be somebody who's such an obliger in everything except for like something having to do with health or diet or fitness. You know what I mean? It's like they're like, you can make me do everything, but you can't make me eat healthfully. You can't make me do this. And it's completely within the control of the obliger what they eat, whether they take their medication, whether they're exercising. But it's a destructive pattern because they're sort of exercising this obliger rebellion in a way that fundamentally is not good for them, and they know that, but they're kind of can get trapped in that pattern. So it's very helpful to recognize it, so then you can see a way out.
I think that you can tell me if this is wrong, and I would posit, if you are leading someone who's an obliger and you're trying to coach them, maybe it's a young person you really care about, that putting outward expectations on them that align with where they need to be going. And I know that a lot of people are really good at going to the gym if they're meeting someone at the gym,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
just going ahead and manipulating that fact that, all right, I'm going to do better with outward expectations, so I'm going to put those on me, or get people around me to put those on me that line up with where I need to be going on the inner.
That is 100% the answer, and that is for obligers. In a way, they have the easiest. All these tendencies have upsides and downsides, and in a way, the obligers, they have the easiest fix for the downside, because if there's an inner expectation that they can't meet, that they want to meet, they just create that outer accountability. You're exactly right. If there's outer accountability for that inner expectation, whether it's meeting a trainer, meeting a friend, paying to take a class, thinking of themselves as a role model for somebody else, whatever that outer accountability is, can allow them to succeed. And as a manager or whatever, you might say, like, you know what, I see that you haven't taken a vacation day, and I see that I expect you to take it. So by X date, I expect you to have taken your vacation days or be on the way, or whatever it is, to help show that you are going to help enforce those limits so that obligers don't get to that point of burnout and resentment. And one of the things that can work, and it's free, which some forms of outer accountability are not free, is to form an accountability group.
Right.
And there's a starter kit for that on my site, GretchenRubin.com, because if you're in a group, like, and you don't have to be working on the same things, it's just everybody is meeting to say, hey, we're watching, did you follow through on this? How did that go? What about the deadline? That feeling that you're going to be accountable to somebody is really helpful. And I think
I mean, it's like a
accountability
book club,
groups,
right? I mean, a book club
yes,
is a form of outer accountability. I'm going to read the book because I have to show up at someone's house with a casserole and talk about it.
absolutely. And I know somebody, that's an excellent example, because an obliger told me that she was like, I love to read, but I never make time to read. What's my problem? But then she joined a book group where you were really expected to read the book, and now she reads all the time. So it's exactly that. Sometimes people form accountability partners,
Right.
but what many obligers have told me is that then they get frustrated because the partner will drop out, or gets distracted, or loses interest, or kind of wanders away. It's a lot of work to be an accountability partner. So you want somebody who's either that you're paying, like a coach,
Right.
or that's deeply interested in themselves, because like you're holding them accountable, so it's a mutual thing, so you're both into it. Or maybe you want to have a group so that you have the kind of consistency and the energy that comes from a group. If one person leaves, it's not such a big deal. Because many obligers have said to me, oh, I wish that my spouse would hold me accountable, but they're not really interested in doing that. Or, oh, I had this writing partner and we were going to both write our novels, but then he lost interest and I kind of stopped writing. Or, oh, we were going to all post our food. And you know what I mean? So sometimes I think partners can be tricky if you don't have total 100% buy-in from that other person. An accountability group maybe is a little more stable. But coaches, trainers, classes, there's tons of ways. But my favorite, I think, most ingenious example of an obliger creating outer accountability for inner expectation was a woman who lived by herself but wanted to make sure she got up at 8:15 every morning. Well, how do you create outer accountability for that if you live by yourself? So what she did is she used Hootsuite, and she made a really embarrassing Facebook post that it automatically posts every day at 8:15 a.m. unless she gets up and disables it ahead of time.
Wow.
So she has to get up. because otherwise this embarrassing Facebook post goes up. I thought that is ingenious. I mean, is that brilliant?
What does it say about a parent if you thought you might motivate your teenager to get out of bed by doing the same thing?
Yes. Oh,
That's
what a
that's
new tool.
probably therapy time, so we can't go there. That's only something you can do for yourself.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
what's it? You're an upholder. You said there's a downside to all of them. I think I've got a great story about a rebel I had lunch with the other
Mm,
day. Multimillionaires, super uber successful. And we were talking about time blocking, or in your language, scheduling, and how effective it can be. And he just bemoaned the fact that he's watching people in our lives, mutual friends, that are so good at scheduling and their habits and following their schedule. And he just said, I just won't be a slave to my calendar.
yep.
What's an advanced warfare for building habits for a rebel? How can they engage and take advantage of this?
Well, that's a really great example of how, none of the strategies, you really have to think about what's going to work for you, because the strategy of scheduling, which is one of the most powerful and popular strategies of habit formation, really does not work for rebels. Exactly, because they often will say, I don't know what I want to do when I wake up in the morning, or, I don't want to chain myself to my schedule. That's a very rebel thing
Yeah,
to
he said,
say.
Letty, you just said chain. And when he said that language, I was like, well, you're a rebel.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, and it's funny. I've been deluged with requests from rebels for more insights into how they can form habits, because often they want to form habits and they're frustrated by their own rebelness. But there are ways that rebels can do it. So rebels always want to act from choice and freedom. So we talked earlier about how habits can be freeing because they get us out of decision making. So rebels want to decide. And as an upholder, I have to say, like, why would you want to be making all these decisions? That's what they want. They want to choose. So for a rebel, it's very helpful to think, well, this is what I choose to do. I choose to go to the gym because I like being I like being young and youthful and energetic, and I like to, be part of that. And a big thing for them is the strategy of identity. That's one of the 21 strategies. Is like because often when we have trouble changing a habit, it's because somehow it's inconsistent with our identity. Like we say, oh, I want to leave work at 6:30, but our identity is that we're a workaholic. Those are inconsistent, so the habit can't change. So for a rebel, they need to think like, well, I'm a strong leader. My identity is I'm a strong leader. And as a strong leader, I will choose to show up on time for a staff meeting, even though I hate being told what to do and having to show up at a certain place at a certain time, because it's part of my identity to do that. I choose to be a good friend, and a good friend RSVPs to a party, even though I hate being told what to do. I hate RSVPing. So it's the strategy of identity. And here's one thing that's funny. Rebels often like to do something in a unique way. So if you are a rebel and you're trying to form a habit, really think about how you can do it in a way that's different. Like with exercise, I heard from a woman who's a female bodybuilder, and she liked the fact that people were like, oh my gosh, you're a female bodybuilder? Oh my gosh, you can lift that much? Like she liked that kind of like outrageous quality to it. I know another rebel who he runs barefoot. And he's really into the fact that everybody's like, hey, dude, you forgot your shoes. Because he's like, I'm running barefoot. So sometimes it's like, well, you're going to quit smoking. You're going to quit smoking in a way that nobody else does. Everybody says you have to do this and that, and you have to use a patch, and you have to use nicotine gum, and you have to have a smoking cessation program. Not you. You're going to do it your own way. That's going to work for you. And so there are ways that rebels can change their habits, but they really have to tap into the rebel values of choice, freedom, authenticity. Because a lot of the strategies, scheduling, monitoring, accountability, ones like that, do not work well for rebels for the most part.
What about upholders? You're in that tribe.
I am.
And,
The small, the few.
yeah,
Yeah.
and is there a downside there? Like, is there, I mean, it seems like they were made to form habits from reading.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you something funny, which is if you look at the people who write books about habits and habit formation and sort of productivity things and stuff, many of them were upholders to begin with, and I had no idea that I was an upholder when I started writing this book, right? Because there was no framework. I thought I was pretty typical as a person forming habits, and it was only when I came up with this framework and realized the dispersal rate that I realized I'm actually on the freaky fringe, which by the way came as a surprise to no one but me. Um, so upholders definitely they like habits, they feel very positively towards habits, and they find it pretty easy to make habits. Now, there are definitely downsides to being upholders. Upholders tend to too readily meet expectations. So like you're a questioner. I have a questioner husband, and it's been very helpful for me to be around somebody who's like always saying like, well, why do I have to do that? Because why do I have to do that? I don't want to just do something because somebody told me to or asked me to. I want to be choosing what to do, to some. And then also, upholders can have this funny thing which I call tightening, which is that for many people, they will stick to a habit, but over time they kind of become looser. For upholders, weirdly, it often tightens, and this can be positive, but it can also be it can be a big pain. So, like, I talked to a medical student who said, an upholder, who said, well, I take notes in class, and a couple times I reviewed my notes before class, and it was maybe helpful a little bit, but it took a lot of time. It really wasn't worth it, but now I can't stop. I feel like I have to review my notes before I go to class. I was like, yeah, you're experiencing tightening. That's upholder tightening, where like the rules are like, I'm a person who eats very low carb. I read Gary Taubes' book, Why We Get Fat, and I completely changed my diet to be very low carb. Most people would consider the way that I eat to be very extreme. I love it. But when I started, I was less strict than I am now. The rules have tightened on me. I eat more strictly now than when I began. And I think for the other tendencies, that's not as common. And upholders, frankly, if I may speak for us, we can be really judgmental and harsh, because for us it's not hard to meet inner and outer expectations, and it can be hard for us to be patient when others question or struggle or resist. And I certainly have much more forbearance for other people now that I understand that most people are not like me. And speaking to other upholders, that's a big issue. It's like feeling very impatient with other people, feeling a lack of kind of empathy for them. But I think once you understand these patterns, then it's easier to see, okay, well, I understand, you just need this in order for this all to work out. So we'll just give everybody what they need and we can all get there.
So what's some wisdom you would give to the questioners? And I'm among that group. How can they maybe more effectively tackle habits for a better life?
Well, so for questioners, it all comes down to reasons and feeling like it's justified, it's sufficient. So when I've talked to questioners who have struggled with a habit, I always just say, like, well, do you really believe that's true? Like, so somebody said, oh, I keep meaning to eat more healthfully, and I have this nutritionist, but then I just don't do anything that he says to do. And I said, well, do you trust the judgment of your nutritionist? And he said, he paused, and he was like, actually, no, I don't. And I was like, well, that's why you're not doing it. If you believed it, you would do it. And so or like, oh, I'm supposed to take vitamin supplements. Do you think you need to take vitamin supplements? No. Go to get dental x-rays. Do you think you need to get x-rays once a year? No, I don't. I think I only need to get them like every 5 years. Okay, well, then that's why you're not doing it. So for a questioner, you always want to go into, like, why am I listening to you? So why do I respect the judgment and the authority of the person who's telling me what to do, including me, if it's me telling myself what to do? And also, what are the reasons? Why is this efficient? Why is this a good use of my time? Why in the morning instead of at night? Why for half an hour instead of an hour? Why this software instead of that software? Why are we hiring this person instead of that person? The more confident the questioner feels that this is the right choice, the more they're going to stick to it. And one of the things you often see with questioners, first of all, tremendous amounts of research, which they love, and also customization. Questioners seem very drawn to the idea of making something perfect for them. So they'll do some kind of exercise plan, but they're going to tweak it for their own, like, they want it to be exactly right for them. They don't want it to be arbitrary. They don't want it to be one size fits all. That means it's arbitrary. They want something that's just right, that's exactly targeted. So if you're a questioner, you want to think about that. What am I asking myself to do, and why do I think this is the right thing? Why is this the highest and best use of my time and energy in order to reach this goal? Because once questioners decide, they can do it, right? Is that your experience? Once you make up your mind, you can do anything you want, but you have to get there mentally.
Absolutely. And I've got the upholder tendency. Like, I took your quiz, the first time questioner. I took it again, after I read the book, and it said upholder. And my wife said, you're a questioner with upholder tendencies. And she probably knows me better than I know myself.
Ha ha ha, yeah.
So it lined up. So I've got a little bit of both in there for sure. The thing that on my worst days, I can get caught in analysis paralysis, right? By looking for the extra piece of data to justify yay or nay. How do we avoid that as questioners?
Well, you put your finger right on one of the negatives of questioners. This is something that people complain about in questioners, that they're draining and distracting with their constant questioning. And the questioners themselves will say that it's draining and too time consuming. So the thing is to put boundaries on it and to decide on limits. So I'm gonna interview 5 candidates but not 10 candidates. I'm gonna research this for a week but not for a month. I'm gonna ask 3 people for recommendations but not 10 people for recommendations. I'm gonna decide that this decision deserves a half an hour of my time doing online research. It doesn't deserve any more of my time than that. After a half an hour, I'm going to make my best judgment. It just doesn't matter that much. A lot of decisions don't require extensive research. If you're going to buy a bike, you know what I mean? Like for most people, there's a few things to think about, but they don't have to spend a month, like hours every night reading every single thing. And maybe you want to as a questioner, and you can, but you want to be in control of that. You want to say to yourself, well, this is how much I think it's worth. I'm going to put a boundary on it and a limit on it, and so that I don't overspend my time and my energy. And usually questioners are very able to do that because that's what they value. They value efficiency and things making sense. And so the idea that this decision just isn't worth that much research, I need to make a decision now, usually they respond to that very well because they're like, that's true. It's inefficient to spend more time on that. It does make sense.
I'm just nodding my head over here. And it also, I have absolutely indulged in research at times, like researching a new computer, which is something I enjoy doing. When
Yes.
you'd be like, you've spent the last X amount of time doing this, and I'm always, it's about the journey, honey. This is the fun
Yeah.
part. The purchasing is all over then, and I'll do that on some things, and I know it's wasteful, but it's definitely those questioner tendencies probably getting the best of me on some things that don't really warrant that much research.
Well, and it's what you want. If you enjoy it and it's not a drain on you, then absolutely do it because it's part of what you like. But the problem comes when like you're at work and they say, okay, we need you to tell us, A or B, and you're like, well, I need perfect information, and they're like, well, we can't wait for perfect information. We need you to say now, and then the questioner feels really unable to decide. Then that can start being a destructive pattern. So you want to just know, like, well, how much leeway do I have here?
Well, let's we're about to get to where we got about 15 minutes left in the hour, and I want to make sure that we get to some of our reader questions. So I want to ask you just maybe one more question, and then we'll flip it to them. So folks, if you've been listening patiently, a lot of people have already contributed questions, but if you've got something you're burning to ask Gretchen, please go ahead and use the questions toolbar and let us know. I saw earlier, one of the things I know that we're going to be asked is to talk about the time trick again. Can you just really quickly, using daylight savings, what would be your 20-second synopsis on how to take advantage of daylight savings time change for time?
Well, when the time is so that you get that delicious extra hour of sleep that we all look forward to, don't take it. Go ahead and get up at your usual time, no matter what the clock says. So the clock says that you have another hour to spend in bed, but you're going to go ahead and get up. And it's not going to be that hard for you because that's the usual time that you get up. But the clock is going to say that you're back an hour. And so you've got an hour in your day without having to go through the physical process of moving your body clock backward.
And I don't know about you and my experience, a lot of people who have achieved a lot tend to spend those morning hours wisely. I read some research that people who were net worth millionaires on average got up 3 hours before they went to work. And that's again an average number, which may not inform any of the individuals on this call, but it made a big impression on me because it rang true with a lot of the people I talked to. They tend to get up in the morning hours when other people are sleeping, got some of their most important work done. And I just thought that was a brilliant strategy for moving closer to that if you wanted to go there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, before we go to the reader questions, one of the last things that you hit on, and it's right at the end of the book, is about clarity. There's 2 kinds of clarity you need when forming habits. Can you just hit that note before we go to the listener questions?
Well, the strategy of clarity was one that I really did not understand the significance of for a long time. But the fact is, the more we understand what we're asking ourselves to do, and why we're asking ourselves to do it, the easier it is to follow through. So let's say you say, I want to eat healthfully. Okay, what does that mean? You can't have the habit of eating healthfully. You could have the habit of not eating sugar. You could have the habit of packing a lunch at home and bringing it to work instead of ordering fast food. You could have the habit of eating breakfast. So you want to be very clear about, well, what are you asking yourself to do? And you want to be very clear about why you're asking yourself to do it. It's not because somebody just vaguely told you to do it, or because you think you ought to do it, or because somebody told, you know, you want to be very, very clear about it. And what I found, one of the things that people often say is a problem with habit formation, and it's absolutely true, is that the role of other people. And there's a strategy of the 21 strategies called the strategy of other people, which is to take into account your influence on other people's habits and their influence on you, because we're enormously powerful in the way that we affect each other's habits. Now, a lot of times people are not helpful. They may just not be supportive, like they're like, whatever, do what you want, I don't care, or they can actually be undermining. You know, like someone says like, well, you want to get up early on the weekends and go for a run, but actually I don't, you know, when you do that I have to get up and make breakfast for the kids, and I prefer to sleep late, so I really don't want you to get up early and go for a run. You know, so they're not being helpful, they're actually being you know, being discouraging, or, you know, oh, what's one cupcake? Come on, it's not going to kill you. It's your birthday. It's my birthday. I made it especially for you. Life's too short not to eat a cupcake, all that stuff. But the more clear we are with ourselves about what we're doing and why, I think the easier it is to stand firm when other people are not being helpful. Because the more you know, this is what's right for me, I have to do what's right for me. And, you know, yeah, it's just one cupcake, but not today. I don't want the cupcake today, because I know that's what's going to make me happier and healthier in the long run. And so the strategy of clarity is just about the importance of really being clear in our own minds, because when we have that clarity, it's much easier to follow through, even when there's interference from the outside world, which there very often is.
Okay, well, I'm going to thank you for that great answer, and it rings true with me. I find when people are struggling, they're often not clear on one part or the other, right? Their instructions on how to form the habit are vague. They didn't realize it was more complex than they thought, or they don't really understand why it's important to them, and therefore they don't really have any emotional skin in the game. So I thank you for highlighting that for everyone. Question from our readers, and I can't find the person who asked us this because I just somehow scrolled. Can someone change their tendency over time, or do people tend to be fixed?
You know, I think people are fixed. I think that it's a pervasive, ubiquitous part of your personality. I think it's hardwired. I don't think it's birth order. I don't think it's gender. I don't think it's upbringing. I think it's just hardwired in there. Unless there's some kind of catastrophic life event, which is just truly rocks you to the bottom of your very soul and changes your personality, which is extremely, extremely rare. And even then, I'm not sure that I'm totally convinced that that's what's happening. Now, sometimes people will say that they wish that they were one thing and want to be another. It's very typical for obligers to say they want to become upholders. They want to sort of blossom forth and be like, well, I don't want to. They resent the idea that they're dependent on outer accountability to follow through on their inner expectations. They want to just rely on themselves. My view on that is, you know, I don't think it's really that possible to change ourselves, our nature, and if it is possible, it's really, really hard. It's easy to build in outer accountability. So I'm like, you get to the same place. One way is easy and fast. The other way requires, like, I don't know, like years of trying to change yourself. And you know, I kind of think with your nature, you get what you get and you don't get upset. And it's better time spent to feel like, well, how can I create a life that's going to allow me to take advantage of the positives of who I am, and to offset the limitations of my nature, and so I get where I want to go, rather than trying to change who we are. Because, you know, all of the tendencies include people who are big successes and also people who are big, big losers. So it's not that one tendency is better than the other. They can all be super successful. When you look at the people who are super successful, if they figured out how to create circumstances that will allow them to succeed. Now, it's going to look very different for a rebel than it would for an obliger, than it would for a questioner, than it would for an upholder. You know, they might need different situations and different mindsets. They can all get there. So I don't think it's worth fussing about changing yourself. I think it's more about changing your circumstances so that you can thrive.
Right. It's the outcomes we're looking for at the end.
Yes.
So
yeah, let's get there as fast as possible, you know? Like.
Well, that was a question from Ken, and we've got about 6 minutes left, so I'd love to get to a couple more of these. I got a question from a manager, and I'm trying I think I need reading glasses. Oh, Alberto, if you are a manager and you have someone on your team that has strong rebel tendencies,
Mm.
um, what's a great strategy for bringing out the best in them for the team? Like, how do we bring them in and make them a big contributing part if they may want to resist some of the other things?
So you definitely do not want to be telling them what to do. The rebels do the best, and they tend to love a challenge. So you might say like, hey Pat, I know you've got the chops to do a great job here. Blow me away. Here's your goal. Go for it. Let's see what you can do. And then you just let them do it their way. Rebels often like having a goal or an outside expectation to push against. They'll ignore it. They'll do it their own way, but they need something to kind of give them that force to get them. So they need to push off from the side of the swimming pool, and so that your expectation can do that for them. But the more you supervise, the more you provide deadlines, the more you micromanage, the more you're going to inspire that spirit of resistance. Now they're very often. Now this can feel.
So challenge them, don't manage them.
Yeah, challenge them, don't manage them. That's a very good, succinct way of putting it. Now, it feels manipulative, but I will throw it out there that rebels often are inspired by "I'll show you." So if you said something like, well, you know what, I don't think that you could turn this report around in 2 weeks. I just don't think you could do it. Then they'll go, I'll show you. One woman, she was trying to get her rebel husband to quit smoking and was asking me for all this advice. And I gave a bunch of things, and she wrote back and said, oh, the thing that worked was when I said, oh, our 18-year-old son says that an old guy like you could never quit smoking, and he's like, I'll show you. So that can really be a motivator for them in some ways. But you just want to remember that a rebel, it's what they choose to do. And so you could say like, this is what we need for the client. Tell me what what do you have in mind? What are you going to do? It's all what they choose, because it can be very helpful that they think outside the box. They're not afraid of breaking expectations. That can be really powerful and positive. But you want to make sure that you don't get them in a place where they're just digging in their heels because they don't want you to boss them around.
Cool. It reminds me of parenting my children at a certain age too. Paul asked a question, which you can let us know if we need to, how much time we want to spend on this, but I thought it was interesting. Everything in this is about personal habits. Is there an organizational application? Do organizations tend to operate as one behavior type or another, or their systems? Have you walked down that path at all?
I've had several people have raised that, and I need to sit down and think about, like, do organizations have a predominant tendency? And you can imagine that, like, if you were in something like, a highly regulated industry, that there would be sort of an upholder flavor, or if you're in a, disruptive software company, there would be kind of a rebel flavor. But often it really depends on the person. People of all different tendencies can come to the same work, but with very different mindsets, but can do an excellent job in their own way. So I think that's a really profound question, and one that I want to think about more and talk to people in organizations about more, because it's true. I'm very focused on how it applies to individuals, but certainly groups could have it as well.
Yeah, and organizations tend to reflect the leaders, and so there's probably some truth there and how that might impact the organization. But we'll be waiting with bated breath for your mini book.
Yeah, you and me both.
Here's an easier one. If someone is an obliger, and this comes from Patty, how can they conquer procrastination? Do you have any specific advice that you would give her?
Outer accountability, 100%. Outer accountability. Deliverables, clients, coaches, an accountability group. You have to have a deadline. You have to have outer accountability to show up, to produce. Build that in, and the obliger will absolutely follow through. You just have to build in that outer accountability.
Cool. I think we have time for one more, and then we're going to run out. Let's see here. Boom, boom, boom. Lots of thanks. Lots of awesomes. This is so helpful. Let's see here. Wow, I think we've hit almost all of these now that I'm reading through some of these. What percentage of upholders? There are like 3 people who really want to know that. So you're resisting for good reason. Does this overlap any of the other behavioral? There's 3 or 4 people, a lot of salespeople here, they talk about the DISC.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, see, is there any overlap between those two? Have you ever looked at that?
Yeah, and that I hear that, and also with Myers-Briggs. I think that every personality framework has strengths and weaknesses and kind of shines a spotlight on personality in a different way. And so I'm not a fan of trying to map one onto the other. Like people are even like, oh, these correlate to the four houses of Hogwarts. I'm like, not really. So I think I think that you lose some nuance when you do that. And so I don't try to like say that this is the equivalent to this because I don't think they match up and I don't think that's very helpful.
Awesome. Well, Gretchen, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's just tons of wisdom. We'll be replaying this and putting it on YouTube for anybody who missed it. So without further ado, can people reach out to you at Gretchen Rubin on Twitter or on Facebook to ask any questions they missed?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And on my site, GretchenRubin.com. Yeah. Anywhere you want. I'm way out there and I love to hear from listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate having you today.
Thank you.
All right, so for everybody else, just a couple of quick things before you go. Please take the survey when you're exiting the webinar. It's how we make it better every month. In the next 24 hours, you'll get a link to the recording of this and a link to the Four Tendencies quiz. And we'll also let you know more about Gretchen's podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, where she often talks with her sister, and you definitely want to check that out if you're interested in this. Our next webinar is going to be October 28th with Lewis Howes. He runs the School of Greatness podcast. He's got a huge book coming out. Super excited to share his wisdom from interviewing like 200 of the most successful people in the world. This, like all of our webinars, will be archived on YouTube, and the link is there. It's bit.ly/onethingwebinars. That's where all of our past webinars can be found. So again, thank you so much for attending. Definitely look us up on social media if we missed anything, and we hope we'll see you again next month. Thank you so much for being here.